Ladies and gentlemen, in this Red Gaming Telecom video, we're going to be doing some analysis in regards to Valve and their recent plans. So Valve are trying to take the living room by storm, but there's much more to their plans than that, and we're going to be discussing that and my thoughts and opinions of their chances of success, as well as what I think their plans hold. So I've been doing some research on this, including, of course, the Steam operating system and so on. And I was also checking out various discussions that Gabe Newell has had in regards to his vision of Linux and why he believes it's the future of gaming. It sounds fairly crazy, perhaps, to a lot of PC gamers to say that Linux is the future of gaming. Windows has been fairly synonymous with gaming for a long time, and if you say PC gaming, you automatically just say, okay, Windows, DirectX, done. But that's not really the case in Gabe's point of view, and there are a couple of reasons for this, and you can see them being exemplified. Now, one of the primary reasons that Valve don't believe in Windows is because of the closed policies. In other words, it's a very closed platform, and gaming itself, they believe, is a quickly evolving media now, and they believe that it's much better to be able to get people involved, create their own things, and that's why they've created the Steam operating system, the hardware, everything basically revolving around it to be easily changeable and alterable by users. So, at a recent talk, Gabe was actually discussing about just how big gaming is becoming. And to give you a perspective on this, and this isn't exactly a verbatim quote, but pretty much verbatim, he said that when there's a patch update for a big title, for example Dota 2, when that patch is actually sending data, in other words on the peak times, that internet traffic accounts for about 2 to 3% of all of the internet traffic in the entire world, in other words IP traffic. And that's insane. I mean, just think about how big the internet is. Just think about how many websites there are, how many, visitors there are, viewers there are, from everything from YouTube all the way down to, someone's tripod homepage. Just think of how many people are accessing data, and then just think that a patch update for one game is taking 2 to 3%. So first of all, let's discuss the SteamOS. SteamOS, of course, is going to be open. It's going to be an open source operating system that Valve have made some changes, although we don't know all of them yet. And it's going to be completely free. In other words, it's going to cost you not one dime to get, and then you simply install it. It's going to become pre-installed on Steam machines, but you can change that to something completely different if you so desire. And it's also going to be freely available to anyone who decides to build their own system. Now, it's quite interesting because one of the things that Gabe said when he first initially started the conference is that the PC marketplace is shrinking, and he believes one of the reasons for that is actually Windows and the closed environments that it creates. The very fact of the matter is that people want to be able to change things now. They want unrestricted access and, not have to pay inflated prices for operating system updates and so on, especially when they don't necessarily like it. For example, let's say you don't like Windows 8 GUI. Well, okay, you can request Microsoft change it, but it takes a hell of a long time. And one of the big issues from games developers' perspectives, if we're talking about stuff like the Mac OS, he said that one of the primary issues is it took like 6 months for them, Valve, to get approval to update just one thing, one application on the Mac. And that's insane. I mean, imagine you're a company with as many resources as Valve, and it takes you 6 months to get approval. So you can imagine what it must be like for, a little guy. Like, for example, if you're just a solitary coder or whatever, it must be absolutely horrific. Obviously, some people are going to have different stories, but whatever. And so they're saying that they and by they, Valve, are becoming pretty much impervious, actually. Despite the PC sales, as in dedicated units, shrinking, their own market share is increasing rather drastically. And this is actually something that AMD and Nvidia have both echoed as well. Indeed, the sale of discrete GPUs and high-end CPUs is going up. One of the reasons behind this is because people are now starting to simply build their own systems. So, one of the problems with Linux gaming, and I'm sure many of you are unfortunately familiar with this if you're a Linux gamer, is debuggers and driver support has been fairly lackluster. You may remember just a day or two ago I spent a long ass time discussing with you guys about the Mantle, AMD's Mantle, which is a low-level graphics API for GCN architectures. I have done a video and an article of it, so you can check them out. But it's not really enough for Linux. Linux has had problems because a lot of games are being written for DirectX, and even if you're not counting that as a particular problem, another huge issue is that for games developers, because the marketplace for games has been fairly minimal on Linux, we're talking like about 1% of the market, it's just not really cost effective for developers who are creating titles like, say, Battlefield or World of Warcraft to traditionally support Linux. It's just, you know, if they get time, a lot of indies do it because I've noticed that if you actually look, by the way, at the average spend on Humble Bundle, you'll commonly notice that the highest averages in terms of per platform is actually Linux. And it does seem that Linux traditionally does support the indies very well. Now, one of the problems that naturally occurs for games development, and this has been something that Valve have discussed with games developers, they basically did a Sony. Sony, of course, asked developers, what do you most want on a console? Valve, on the other hand, have asked, what do you want for Linux? What would help you make games on a Linux platform? And the answer was pretty simple: a debugger. This is exactly the same issue if you're experiencing a problem on, say, your PC or anything, if your dishwasher's broken or whatever. If you don't know what the problem is, you can't fix the problem. Therefore, you have to do the fault diagnostic. But the problem is, as someone who's learning coding myself, I'm only writing small applications, but obviously I'm becoming more and more proficient. But something could break simply because you don't put a colon on it, or you're addressing a piece of memory that's already reserved by something else, or because you forgot to declare a variable early on, or because the gods just don't smile on you that day or whatever. There's so many different variables, and there are not just small games that are using thousands of lines of code, and larger titles with, say, Unreal Engine or whatever. By the time you've compiled the blasted thing, you're looking at 1 million, 2 million lines of code. I'm not just kidding you. Even John Carmack has said this. This is why games engines are sometimes, you notice a lot of similarities even between improved versions of the engines, because it takes so bloody long to change them. So imagine you potentially have, let's say, 1 million lines of code, and you don't know why the game's not compiling. And because, of course, Linux is such an open system, you don't necessarily have a parity between all different versions. So therefore, something may work fine on one core distribution, but not so well on another. And so trying to find these similarities and so on has been a problem. So Valve are working with AMD, they are working with Nvidia, and they are working with various other groups to not only create better debuggers, but they're also working with them to improve things such as driver support. And these are not my words, these are Gabe's, but they said they created graphics APIs and drivers, and when they first started, they were trying it with, what game was it now? I think it was Left 4 Dead 2. And when they started, they had performance that was abysmal. I mean, he didn't exactly give frame rates, but he said it was pretty awful. Then they did some changes, and they, optimized it and so on. They figured out why it wasn't working. They got better graphics APIs. They, worked with AMD and NVIDIA to provide better drivers and so on and so forth. And then they had better performance with the Linux distribution than what they did with the Windows version. It's also worth noting that consoles such as the Sony PlayStation, the PS4 actually uses FreeBSD, which is very similar to Linux. It's not exactly Linux, but obviously it's been heavily modified internally and all of that good stuff. So I think one of the big things is that traditionally getting games into the living room, this is something that Gabe was discussing at a couple of conferences, that people don't expect to have access to their library when you sit in front of your couch, right? So let's assume that you're a PC gamer and you want to play a game in your living room. Well, most people don't have a PC in their living room. Most people have it in like the study or bedroom or whatever, and then they have like a console in the living room if they're a gamer. And this isn't really an ideal solution for Gabe, because he said there shouldn't be like a disconnect. You shouldn't feel that, okay, I'm in this location, so I do not have access to those games. Cool. And then, if you want to play those games in the living room, you have one of two choices. You can either, use a very long HDMI cable or bring a PC into whatever, or you could power them again, which isn't ideal. So, but he's talking about SteamBoxes now. We'll go into that kind of as a two-prong attack. A SteamBox isn't necessarily a high-powered machine. As far as I can understand it, Gabe is wanting to create this as kind of like two options. Let's assume you are someone who already has a reasonably decent gaming rig, or better, whatever, but a machine that's capable of playing the games that you want to play. Let's go with that. You don't necessarily want to buy another machine of the high spec for the living room. It just doesn't help you. Instead, what would be much better is if you could simply buy a very cheap machine that is capable of streaming the title. And so an idea, of course, came into Gabe's mind that why not just allow you to stream the titles over the network? So in other words, have the main big PC, your expensive-ass high-powered rig, do its own thing, but then stream that data to a cheap media system. And this has numerous benefits, including the ability to play a lot of music and so on. So you have access to all of your library, you have access to all your music, you have access to films, and much more besides. So I understand that point of view, and gaming now is becoming a solution where he doesn't believe that the closed nature of Windows, the closed nature of these proprietary platforms that people are obviously trying to make money, and this isn't me having a poke at Microsoft. I am not someone who hates Windows. I actually really love Windows. I love a lot of stuff that Microsoft have done. However, there's no getting around the fact that there is some really cool stuff regarding Linux. I'm just starting to get used to Linux myself. I'll be honest, I was really out of the Linux loop. I never really utilized it that much, but I'm learning it a bit for purposes of like work and for the purposes of like servers and virtual boxing and so on for you guys, mostly on stuff I'm working on kind of in the background. And one thing that shocked me is obviously there was a lot of different desktop environments and so on. For those who don't know, that basically means that you can actually choose your own desktop, and there's a couple of them, for example KDE, and if you don't like an element of that desktop, you can simply uninstall it and get something else, which is really cool and makes it a hell of a lot easier to modify. So if you don't like, for example, the start menu or whatever it's called on that version, then you can just change it. If you don't like the way, say, the task manager handles, you can change it. If you don't like the file browsers, then you can change it. If you are one of those people who have multi-monitor support. There's a hell of a lot of that with multiple desktop solutions actually built into Linux, and it's a really nice multitasking environment to do a lot of work, and that's why a lot of programmers actually utilize Linux. In fact, Valve have stated that their primary systems now for handling all of their source code and assets and so on are actually Linux, and their workstations are Linux because of these reasons. Obviously, they need Windows to be able to test games, but primarily their systems are Linux based because of the robust stability. So let's add to this. Now, PC gaming as a whole is considered by many to be expensive, but I've maintained that I don't really think it's that much more expensive than console gaming, and this is not turning this into a console versus PC war. Please don't do that. I believe both have their own places in the market, but one of the issues is if you've ever spec'd a PC for someone, if you're one of those people who, you know, your buddies come to you and say, oh, you know, I want to buy a new PC, can you help me out? And you say, okay, cool. And they say, what's, you know, and you ask them what their budget is, and, you know, they'll give you X as the figure, and you say, cool. Then you immediately start to spec up, and, you know, you're all excited, you're adding the CPU, you're adding the RAM, you're adding the graphics card, whatever, and then you realize, as soon as you've, you know, hit about their budget, let's say they have a budget of 500 Great British pounds, I don't know what that would be for you guys in the States, I'm guessing maybe about $700, $800, I'm not exactly sure what your hardware prices are like, but you know, whatever. Let's just say $700 versus about £500 to give a little bit of wiggle room there. Immediately you hit that and you think, cool, this is a pretty good base unit, and then you think to yourself, uh-oh, what version of Windows do they have? And, you know, they say it's a really old version of Windows, or, you know, they've not budgeted for that in, or whatever. And obviously some cases you can reuse your Windows and all's fine. Other times it's like they've got a really old version of Windows, or, you know, they've lost their driver disk and they've no longer got the serial code, and it's just it's not ideal. I pointed out that I created a video actually about, it's a really popular video actually, surprisingly popular on the channel, about can you build a PC for, you know, roughly the same price as a PS4 pricing for a PC, and you actually found that you could build a much more powerful system than the PlayStation 4, at least in terms of hardware specs, for only a little bit more expensive. That includes a better graphics card and so on as well. Obviously, you have the overhead in terms of APIs and so on that AMD, for example, are trying to work on with, say, the Mantle technology, but that's a different topic. But the primary issue with this, of course, is that then you had to add the OS on top. So Valve really want to start discouraging that. They don't believe that Windows has a place anymore. They are, I mean, another point as well that Gabe made is he believes that the minuscule cost of actually adding another player in terms of the bandwidth they cost is actually significantly less than the benefit of having them in the community. In other words, if I don't play a game, my benefit of suddenly joining into that community is actually better than if I would never to touch that game, because once I'm in, they can start selling, say, microtransactions or whatever. And I understand and respect that point of view. Obviously, certain games it doesn't work that well for, and I understand that, you know, free to play, I'm completely behind the fact it doesn't work on all markets, and I wouldn't really want it to. I don't really necessarily agree it works on, say, AAA titles, but all markets have their own, you know, thing. So another problem, of course, that Valve are trying to resolve is the hardware side of things, and obviously if they can create small, probably APU type of devices that are open, easy to change, add in, say, a discrete GPU, easily hack, change your operating system, whatever, I think that that's going to be a very good thing. Obviously they're going to have various levels for this in terms of performance and pricing, but I think they're going to do fairly well. I looked at the joypad and I haven't had time to, or had opportunity to touch it. From what I'm hearing, people are fairly impressed with it. I imagine for those who are very used to keyboard and mouse, such as myself. I mean, when I play a FPS on a pad, I'm just going to be really honest. I'm pretty bad. I really am. I was reasonable at a couple of games on the Xbox 360 when I used to play it a lot online. For example, Perfect Dark Zero, when it was like, you know, the launch title and everyone was online. I was reasonable at it, but I just get a bit frustrated with the lack of precision in the controls, and this is my own personal opinion. But from what I'm hearing, they are saying that it's a lot more accurate. They're using more of a touch type of pad with very cool haptic feedback. In fact, they're actually so sensitive you can actually use the feedback as speakers, so we're told. But I digress. The big point for me is that I think there's still going to be a lot of people who are unfamiliar or unconvinced with the pad. I think it's still, however, going to be one of those situations where it could definitely work. I mean, one of the problems, traditional problems, with getting a pad working, let's say you buy an Xbox 360 pad, but you actually don't need the level of control of a keyboard and mouse. Or let's even say that it more lends itself towards a gamepad, which I think, for example, platform titles do. My own personal opinion, of course, but there you have it. The problem isn't necessarily that, you know, the pad itself or the precision. The problem is the fact that there's that interface. The simple fact of the matter is, if a title is old, good luck trying to get it working natively. So then you have to use something like Xpadder or whatever to pretty much map a button on a controller to a keyboard button or something like that. So, for example, up on a D-pad would be the equivalent of pressing W on your keyboard for forward. Or let's say you could map A on Xbox 360 pad, and that would be the equivalent of pressing space. So that works, but it's not an ideal solution. And so their theory behind this is, okay, well, what we're going to do is we're going to change this. We're going to basically change the idea behind this and basically create it, okay, where people can of course map their own, but also you get community choices where the community would have created it, and then you can simply download other people's configurations, which means you're basically good to go in a few seconds flat. Interestingly enough, in another comment of Gabe's, he pointed out that once you empower people, and this is the key word, Valve are firmly entrenched on the thought that there's going to be a lot less of a gulf between creator of content and consumer of content. In other words, you as the game's player, so in other words, you know, you're playing the latest title versus the developer who's creating a title. They believe that it's going to become a lot more intertwined, and they say that they physically cannot keep up with the amount of content that players create for the games. And we're talking about levels on like Counter-Strike or, you know, scenarios on games, and it makes sense. I mean, have you ever looked at something like Bethesda's Skyrim? Check out the Steam Workshop or any of the fan, you know, project type of databases where they've got like the files to download, and my goodness, there are so many. It's actually just ridiculous. I mean, there's everything from like being able to modify how the lock picking works to being able to, you know, create your own player homes and being able to explore new areas. Some people are actually modifying it so you can do crazy stuff. I mean, I've seen, you know, the idea to actually mod the game to actually add in some of the Elder Scrolls 3 areas, or being able to actually play the entire storyline of Morrowind in Oblivion. They're apparently working on it for Skyrim. Or being able to add new races, or new classes, or new spells, and new side quests, and new main quests, and whatever else. It's just insanity, like the stuff people do. Even, for example, GTA on the PC, we're talking about GTA 4, I've seen incredible graphics mods on this. I'm talking like incredible, like the graphics just look astounding, ridiculously high resolution images, or being able to even play as like Iron Man on GTA, and that's just insanity. And yet they've done it, so you can actually fly around as Iron Man. You've even got opportunities to play as like the Incredible Hulk, and I shit you not on this stuff. I mean, it's really cool. Like, people are really smart. That, you know, some people in the community just really put out some incredibly awesome stuff. Look at what was it? Dark Souls Prepare to Die edition on the PC. The developers said, well, we're not really sure how to, you know, do this, but we're going to give it a shot. And, you know, to be fair, they didn't have to port the game to the PC. They, you know, they did the best, and they admitted they weren't familiar with the architecture. So I'm not criticizing them, but the port just wasn't good. But what happened? Within just a few days, the community had basically fixed half the issues that had arisen from the port, including the crappy internal resolution. And they'd fixed it, and then that was it. It was like, you know, good to go. And they fixed the keyboard and mouse support, they fixed the controller support, and, you know, it's to the point where the community, it makes sense. Look, if you've got 50,000, 100,000, 200,000, 300,000, a million people, whatever, playing this bloody thing, they're gonna find stuff, they're gonna create stuff faster than you can, because, you know, you've got other projects that you have to do. I think that Linux is still very, very early on the game's development side, and the problem is, obviously they do have a very small market share, but they, and I'm talking about Valve, are making it abundantly clear now that we are not just kidding, we're not just saying this stuff, we firmly believe it. And the thing of it is, Valve are one of those companies that really just seem to succeed. I'm hoping that we see a vision of Valve moving forward with this. I don't necessarily want it to replace Windows as a gaming system. In fact, I wouldn't want it to replace, but I'd like it to add. I would like it to supplement or complement. Valve, of course, are not going to be just saying, okay, well, you know what, we're not going to be doing the Steam platform on PC anymore. If you are a Windows gamer, that's just stupid and doesn't make any sense whatsoever. But they will be, of course, supplementing this with the SteamOS. The problem is, of course, the compatibility of all the current titles. Now, if you're someone who wants to stream, it's not that much of a big deal, but if you're someone who wants to play a native title that's not been converted yet, there are some options. You've got, for example, Wine, which is it's not exactly an emulator, but it pretty much allows Windows games to run on Linux. It's not ideal, as it adds a lot of overhead. And obviously you've already got DirectX's overhead natively anyway, which is something that we've discussed. I think we're going to be seeing AMD's Mantle probably helping a lot with this. And obviously you've got OpenGL as well. OpenGL, at least to John Carmack, is preferable to DX11. So it's really interesting, actually. It's going to be I'm going to be doing a lot of coverage on the SteamOS. Of course, I'll be doing some testing on that, and I'm really hoping that it's as good as what we assume it's going to be. I mean, I have high hopes. I don't think it's going to be like, oh my god, everything works instantly and there are no issues at all. Because I remember when the original Steam came out for PC, and I hated it. I detested it. I mean, I was like, what's this? All I want to do is play Counter-Strike, and you're making me go through all this crap. And now I love Steam. I'm not exactly a fanboy of it, but I think it's one of the things that's really helped PC gaming hold on. And I think that it's helped to pioneer a lot of stuff, including digital downloading and making it really normal. That's not to say that I want Steam to take over everything, because my personal opinion, without competition, so that would be like Origin or whatever as well. It's not ideal. I don't think that not only any market, but I don't think any product can thrive. And this is one of the arguments that I've been making all along. I am, of course, being very honest regarding the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One specifications. I completely believe that the Xbox One specs are inferior to the PlayStation 4. But that doesn't mean that the Xbox One is a terrible system, and I want the Xbox One to do well, because I don't want Sony to have a free run of this generation of consoles, because I don't think it's good for anyone in the industry. I don't think it's good for you and I as gamers. I don't think it's good for games developers, and I don't really even think it's that good for Sony, because without competition, you're never really at your best. That's just my personal opinion. Anyway, hopefully you've enjoyed the video. I will see you soon. Take care. Bye for now.